On a construction site that will soon become the new Scotland Yard Police headquarters in London, a most grisly discovery sends the press into a frenzy. Part of a body, the victim unknown, matched to further remains found elsewhere in the city almost a month prior. A medical school prank? A random act of violence? Or could it be, as the papers would speculate, a link to London's most notorious criminal, the killer known as Jack? Designed by Gabriele Amari and Gianluca Santopietro, Whitehall Mystery is a hidden movement game for 2 to 4 players set against the investigation of the titular unsolved case of 1888. Up to 3 players will take on the role of Scotland Yard, attempting to deduce the plans of the player controlling Jack by detecting traces of his movements across London. Jack will have limited moves to place each of his macabre souvenirs in pre-chosen locations whilst avoiding arrest. At the start of the game, the investigators will each take up one of 6 positions within the city marked by these yellow-lined black squares. The player controlling the killer will then select 4 discovery locations corresponding to one of the white circled locations within each quarter of the board. They will then place a red marker on one of these circles denoting their starting location and make their first hidden move on the board. During the following round, they must reach one of the other discovery locations within 15 turns. Once there, they will place a red marker revealing the discovery location to the other players, and will have 15 more turns to reach the next of their chosen locations until all 4 red markers have been placed. They can travel to the discovery locations in any order that they choose, and if they successfully reach all 4 without being arrested by the investigating players or being entirely enclosed, which we'll come on to in a moment, they will win the game. Each of the 15 turns within each round follow 3 basic steps. First, the Jack player will make a hidden move to any one adjacent numbered circle, denoted by them being able to trace a dotted line from their current location to it without passing another circle location and without moving through an investigator model. They will note their new location down on their pad and move the Jack marker a step along the movement track so that the investigators can keep track of how many moves Jack has taken. The investigators do not move via the numbered circles but via the black squares known as crossings. In the second phase of the turn, each investigator in a specific order, yellow, blue and then red, may move up to 2 crossings from their current location. Once all the investigators have moved, or not according to their wish, the final phase of the turn begins. In this phase, each investigator model can either look for clues or execute an arrest. If they look for clues, they will select an adjacent circular space and declare it to the Jack player. If Jack has been or is on this space, Jack will place a yellow marker on the board to indicate this. If not, the investigator may continue to declare adjacent circle spaces until no more spaces are adjacent or a trace of the fugitive is found. This creates a small consideration for the investigating players in that they may choose to eliminate spaces they think Jack is unlikely to have travelled through before trying those they think are likely, so as to derive as much information from the search as possible. Executing an arrest functions very similarly, except the investigator can only choose one adjacent circle. If the Jack player is currently on that space, they are caught and the investigators win the game. If not, even if Jack has already been on the space previously, Jack will say no and impart no further information. As each investigator can only look for clues or arrest, the investigators must balance the benefit of finding a trace of the Jack player's path against the chance of actually capturing him. The investigators will also win in the event the Jack player is not arrested but is unable to make their move due to their being surrounded by investigators, though it must be said this is a relatively unlikely scenario. This is partly because of the 3 extra abilities the Jack player has at their disposal to get them out of a tight spot, each of which they may use twice during the entire game. The boat ability allows Jack to move from one blue circle to any other blue circle within the same area of water. Areas of water are defined by being completely enclosed within a single dotted black line, such as this area here, which is distinct from the river section above it. The blue investigator has a similar ability that allows him to move the same way once per game, albeit from a crossing along such a dotted line rather than from the blue circles themselves. Similarly, the alley ability allows Jack to move through a group of buildings defined as any land area enclosed by a single dotted line. This allows the Jack player to jump through an area that would otherwise be closed off, useful for accelerating their progress if they find themselves out of position, or for avoiding investigators that are getting too close. The red investigator can perform a similar movement once per game. Lastly, Jack can use the coach ability to take 2 turns in one, moving 2 spaces in the process. This is also crucially the only way that they can pass through an investigator during their movement, a detail that will encourage the Jack player to save this ability as a final recourse if they are becoming surrounded, but that may also inadvertently indicate to the investigators that they are close to an arrest. This is because whenever the Jack player uses any of these abilities, they must declare which and place that ability card next to the relevant turns on the movement tracker, so that the investigators have a record of how and when such abilities have been used during the current round. The ability to skip across water or move through investigators is powerful, but declaring the use of these abilities can also provide a critical clue as to the current whereabouts of Jack. The yellow investigator, really 2 investigators in one, can play a critical role in taking advantage of such moments using one or both of their 1 per game abilities. Faithful Hound Smoker allows the yellow player to either move an extra crossing during the movement phase, akin to the carriage ability, or to continue looking for clues in every adjacent numbered circle even when he has already discovered a clue. Meanwhile, the yellow character's own ability allows him to essentially teleport one of the other investigators to an adjacent crossing once per game. Whilst doing so will prevent that investigator from moving, looking for clues or making an arrest during the current turn, it allows the investigators to compensate should one of them be stranded too far away to be useful in later rounds of the game. As you can see, although it has taken a little time for me to explain comprehensively, the rules of the game are quite straightforward. That said, ensuring all players have a complete understanding of the rules before the game commences is clearly critical to a positive game experience. As is the case for most hidden movement games, if players misunderstand what is possible, particularly how the Jack player is capable of moving or not, and what they must declare when, then the game will start to unravel. But most players will pick up the basics of such a game quickly, and by assigning the Jack role to the most experienced player in a given group, you can allow less experienced players the benefit of working collaboratively as investigators. I also think the additional rule that any discussion between the investigators must occur in the open hearing of the Jack player, whilst undoubtedly advantageous for Jack in some respects, is also a means of compensating for such misunderstandings, as the Jack player can correct assumptions that are impossible as opposed to just incorrect. Whilst the game pieces themselves are fairly low detail, and only differentiate Jack and the investigators by sculpt, the investigators themselves merely being different colours of the same model, placing the investigators on square bases and Jack on a circle to match the spaces they traverse on the board is an elegant touch. The board itself and the character and power cards are all made of robust cardstock that should stand the test of time. The game also furnishes Jack with a pad of track sheets and a screen that perfectly encloses the pad, whilst also providing a copy of the map that enables the hunted player to make decisions without staring at the board itself in a way that might reveal their position. However, whilst the game is generous in the resources it provides to the Jack player, the investigators have much less to work with. Most significantly, the game doesn't give the investigators any other resources to keep track of their theories or the possible paths that the killer might have taken, with the exception of those instances where a clear trace of the path is found. This means that the investigators have to keep track of their theories in their heads, and if they want to keep track of what spaces they have checked, the same applies. This also places a burden of trust on the Jack player to be honest about their movements and ensure that each of their moves is legal. Whilst the trackpad technically provides a means of the Jack player providing their route after the game, realistically so much will have changed on the board by the time this is revealed that investigators would be hard pressed to spot an error, genuine or malevolent, in the quarry's path. Despite this, how well used the instructions in my copy of the game appear on camera is probably a good indication of how high this game ranks in my top board games of all time list. Truth be known, from the first time I saw the game played, I had a feeling it was destined to become a favourite. Clearly I was not alone in that, as I spent an agonising amount of time waiting for the game to be restocked before I finally got my hands on it. The simple but tactical nature of the rule set has made it an easy game to teach to experienced and novice gamers alike, and the game has created some of the more memorable and enjoyable game experiences I've had. This is in some ways quite surprising, given the morbid theme and slightly irreverent way that the fine details of the setting are handled. For those unaware, the titular Whitehall mystery refers to a real and unsolved murder that took place contemporaneously with those attributed to Jack the Ripper. You may think this is not in poor taste, given that the real-life victim was never identified, and we are talking about an event over 135 years in the past. Despite this, stop and think about it long enough and it's hard not to realise that there is something quite ghoulish about the Jack player gleefully distributing body parts across London in a way that never lingers on any of the horror this violence deserves. As my daughter remarked to me the first time we played this game, it feels like a very strange theme for a game. Truthfully, I'm not sure what purpose is served by taking such a tragic real-life event and making it the subject of fun, as opposed to using the same mechanics in a different, or at the very least imaginary setting. I'll let you be the judge as to whether the fact I frequently don't think about it long enough is evidence of some psychopathy on my part, or merely the result of the game's finely tuned mechanics. Either way, I appear to be in good company. This is a game that I regularly manage to get to the table. While it can technically be played with a single investigator, the experience is definitely elevated by the debated decisions that emerge when you have a team of investigators on the hunt. Though as ever with such games, making sure decisions are not dominated by a single player is also critical. It is also evident from the appetite of my gaming friends to play this game that it really captures something of the thrill of a good cat and mouse chase. Even my daughter, despite her reservations, regularly wishes to take on the role of Jack and seek the thrill of evading the other players. You might rightly point out that there are lots of hidden movement games that achieve similar outcomes, but for me there are some clever aspects to the design of Whitehall Mystery that really set it apart from its wider genre. First of all, it gives the killer a clear objective to complete which is known to both sides, and a time limit for its completion. This simple detail means that the killer has to be purposeful about their movements, working to reach the next discovery location before the time in that round runs out, and investigators can infer a certain amount about Jack's likely movements and intent. For me, this already elevates Whitehall Mystery above several other hidden movement games where the hunted player only has to avoid the hunting players rather than having a purpose and constraints of their own. I also admire the way difficulty for both sides changes as the game progresses. At the start of the game, Jack can be heading towards any of 3 board quarters and has all of his special abilities available to assist. This makes life initially very difficult for the investigators, who will find it a tall order to both identify Jack's heading and prevent him from reaching it. However, by round 3, Jack's destination has to be within a specific quarter of the board. This tips the advantage towards the investigators, especially if they have managed to force Jack to use some of his abilities earlier in the game, limiting his ability to get out of trouble. Investigators certainly can pin down Jack in earlier rounds, but this slow swing in the difficulty between the two teams ensures that the investigators always have a meaningful final shot at defeating Jack, even if they have not proven effective earlier in the game. Jack, by contrast, is on an escalating difficulty path that will ensure a truly satisfying victory for the killer if they are able to reach the final discovery location. It's a balance so finely tuned that many games I have played come down to the last few turns of round 3, with Jack being caught just before he reaches his target, or reaching it a mere whisper ahead of the coppers. The game also recognises that when this occurs, the losing side might want just one more try to win the game. The fixed turn limit for Jack, technically a maximum of 45 turns but likely shorter still, means that individual games never overstay their welcome, and that it is possible to play several rounds of Whitehall Mystery, perhaps rotating who controls Jack, in a single gaming session. All this to say, horrific premise or not, I really feel this game deserves a space in your collection. You'll probably already have an idea whether the setting is an obstacle to you, and whether this style of game appeals to you. But beyond that, it has my strongest recommendations. There simply aren't many games in my collection that I have coveted for so long, only for the experience of the game to still exceed my expectations. We haven't featured hidden movement games on the channel previously, so it seems absolutely appropriate that we should start with one of the very best. I hope this review is helpful. Please do share your experiences with this game, good or bad, in the comments, and while you're there, let us know what other hidden movement games you think we should try. If you haven't already, check out some of our other reviews and consider subscribing to really help our small channel grow. London has earned a rest from crime, but if the forces of evil should rise again to cast a shadow on the heart... No wait, that's Batman. Oh well. Until next time, work hard, play better, and take care out there.